Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is located here in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're thrilled that you could all join us here tonight on what is ostensibly a winter day for a very special visit from Drew Hayden Taylor. It has been an unfair amount of time since we've had him behind a microphone here at the store, so we're completely thrilled to have him here tonight. I'm also keenly aware that no one is here to listen to me, so I'm going to make this as quick as humanly possible. His new novel, Cold, which is published by McClelland Stewart, thank you very much for publishing this book and for making this evening happen, is a combination of murder mystery, it's a thriller, it's a horror novel, and as it is a book by Drew Hayden Taylor, it is also very funny while simultaneously being quite unsettling. If the story, I understand the story correctly, it was originally written as a screenplay, and it's one of those things where when you read the book, it has that propulsion of actually viewing something, but it does such interesting things in interacting with literary form and just the idea of writing as well, that it's this thing that's made a complete fascinating transition into the written word. So I hope that you all enjoy it if you haven't read it already, and you'll be hearing more about it in just a moment. We are, of course, co-presenting this event with our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. And you'll be hearing a little bit more from their director, Charlene Deal, at the close of the event. Thank you, Dave McClelland. Now, I won't say much more, but I do have the inestimable pleasure of introducing the people you will be hearing from tonight. Other than that, you'll only be hearing from me at the end when I will come back with some absolutely thrilling notes on how you can go and get a book signed. So, your host for this evening is, of course, the inimitable Rosanna Deerchild. Very acceptable applause. Rosanna is Cree from the community of Opipanapawan, Cree Nation. She has been a storyteller for more than 20 years as a journalist, broadcaster, and as an exceptional poet. She is the host of CBC Radio 1's Unreserved. Her debut poetry collection, This is a Small Northern Town, shared her reflections of growing up in a racially divided place. It won the 2009 Aquabooks Lansdowne Prize for Poetry. Her second book, Calling Down the Sky, is a collaborative work with her mother, who was forced to attend Indian residential school. Her first play with the Royal MTC's Pimateowan Creators Circle was called The Secret to Good Tea, and was produced by the stage during their 22 to 23 season. Our guest of honor this evening, Drew Hayden Taylor, has done many things, most of which he is proud of. An Ojibwe from the Curved Lake First Nations in Ontario, he has worn many hats in his career, from performing stand-up comedy at the Kennedy Centre in Washington, D.C., to being artistic director of Canada's premier Native theatre company, Native Earth Performing Arts. He has been an award-winning playwright with over 100 productions of his work, and just the published list of plays on the front page of this book takes up an entire page. He's been a journalist, a columnist, appearing regularly in several Canadian newspapers, magazines, and news networks, short story writer, novelist, television scriptwriter, and has worked on over 20 documentaries exploring the Native experience, including the popular Searching for Winnetou. His documentary series on APTN, Going Native, is in its third year. The author of 34 books, he looks forward to finding out where his imagination will take him next. Please give a very raucous round of applause for Drew Hayden Taylor.
As we say in my reserve, grazie. It's a delight to be here, though I gotta say I'm a little puzzled. It's colder where I come from than it is here. So all the stories I've heard about the weather here in Winnipeg have been grossly exaggerated. Probably the same I heard about mosquitoes here too. Anyways, I'm here with my new novel, my 35th book, Cold. And to me, it's the flip side of an earlier book I did called Motorcycles and Sweetgrass, where Motorcycle and Sweetgrass, I took a character from Anishinaabe mythology, cosmology, whatever term you want to use, contemporized him and put him in a modern contemporary First Nations community, riding a vintage 1953 Indian Chief motorcycle and looking like a white guy so no one would recognize him, and getting into mischief one summer on the reserve. And I decided to do the flip side of that and take another character from the Anishinaabe and I think Cree mythology, cosmology, and this time put him in an urban environment in the middle of winter. And it was so much fun to do. And I took it out to, when I worked on it and I worked on it and I worked on it, I sent it to my publisher. I was terrified at what the response would be. And the publisher said, Drew, we read it, we loved it, but there's one slight problem with it. And I said, what? And they said, it needs a sequel. So I signed a 2-book deal and I'm going to be starting to work on the sequel this summer. Oh, you said you haven't read it yet. So I'm going to read to you a bit about it. So as you heard, it's a book that encompasses several different genres. It's a police procedural, murder mystery. It deals with humor, it's horror, all these different things. And what was the term the gentleman said? It was unsettling and humorous, which ironically is the exact term my partner said on our first date about me. Anyways, I'm going to read to you from a section in it where the creature, who I'm not mentioning for certain reasons, makes his first appearance in downtown Toronto. Across campus on a small residential side street, a little dog was taking its master for a walk. Standing barely 8 inches above the ground, Polly had difficulty navigating some of the snowbanks along the sidewalk. And to that, the accumulating snow and these nightly toilet forays were becoming increasingly difficult for the miniature schnauzer. Justin Majors once again cursed the municipal workers for not doing a better job at keeping the sidewalks cleared. Obviously, none of them had small dogs to worry about. Probably all cat owners, he reasoned. So far, Polly was about 20 minutes into her sniff and reject excursion, not having yet selected the best place to do her business. The evenings had not been cold enough to make these outings uncomfortable in recent weeks. Luckily, February had yet to bare its vicious teeth, but still, the noise of the traffic bothered Mr. Majors. Vehicles on wet or snow-covered streets always seemed to generate substantially louder noise. And while it didn't seem to trouble Polly, Mr. Majors preferred the calm serenity of his little cul-de-sac. The city, thanks to all those goddamn condominiums that kept popping up everywhere, had gotten so much noisier since the 80s. That was a good 3 Pollys ago. To protect his sanity against the sonic pollution, Mr. Majors had given himself for Christmas a set of expensive noise-canceling headphones and hooked up to his cell. During these long walks, he listened to music, podcasts, or various CBC radio shows, depending on what was of particular interest. At the moment, he was catching up on the day's news. A cold, professionally sounding woman's voice filled him in on what the Prime Minister was up to. Up ahead and to the right was the entranceway to a small park. It was Polly's failsafe. If nothing else worked, she would never pass up the opportunity to drop her load amidst the maples and pines that populated the 3 acres of parkland. As usual, one of the 4 overhead streetlights was out. It had been a good 5 months since Mr. Majors had first noticed it, and still it was not repaired. Damn municipal workers, thought Mr. Majors once again, probably spending all their time fixing the potholes in their own streets. At least this route was quieter. Already he was leaving behind the rush and storm of a busy Toronto street. The stridency of downtown urban life could still be heard, but the intensity was fading. As well, his anger towards the civil employees of this metropolitan sprawl began to lessen. Trees and park benches had that effect on him. And Polly was expressing a certain amount of interest in a patch of unsoiled snow. The lady announcing the news reported that somewhere out west, Mr. Majors didn't catch the city, possibly Edmonton, there had been a gruesome murder. Police were investigating. Well, they better, thought Mr. Majors. That's how they earn those big salaries and pay for their union of theirs. And it followed another potential murder in Regina, too. Something about decapitation. Again, police were investigating. Mr. Majors detested this kind of news. He already knew the world was full of cat-loving psychopaths. He didn't have to be continually reminded of it, so he turned the volume down. Finally, commented Mr. Majors to himself, as Polly began her circular dance. Centering a good chunk of his post-dinner activities around the bowel movements of a 12-pound dog would have embarrassed his father. But Connor Majors was long dead, and Justin Majors no longer had to bow and scrape to the old man's wishes. As far as he was concerned, if he had the time and gas money, he would love the opportunity to take Polly to his father's resting place in Pembroke and let her go nuts on the old man's grave. The thought kept him warm and amused despite the growing cold. The dog kept sniffing around the ground, walking around in a circle as if trying to find the proper aesthetic angle from whence to shit. Hurry up, Polly, you eat your meals in less than half a minute. You should be able to do this in half a minute, Mr. Majors muttered. Nearby, he heard some snow falling from a shoulder-high cedar hedge. Must have been a squirrel running through or something. Stupid squirrels, he thought. They're supposed to be sleeping this time of year in those houses made of leaves he couldn't help but see in the trees throughout the city. Mr. Majors knew he would sleep away these dark months if he could. The problem at hand was that Polly loved squirrels, or more accurately, hated them. Already the small animal's ears were standing upright, and she was facing the hedge in a crouched position, a low growl in her throat. Any interest in defecating was now replaced by something far more interesting located deep within the hedge. Oh shit, Mr. Majors said aloud, unaware of the irony of his comment. The man gave the leash a quick jerk, hoping he could coax his Polly away from savagely attacking some rodent that was barely smaller than her. He jerked a second time, but Polly would not be denied. Somewhere deep in her genetic history was a strain of savage hunting dogs, so strong and eager to do battle despite the size of the current generation. Lurching forward, the small dog managed to pull Mr. Major's arm forward, and Polly disappeared into the wall-like green foliage. God damn it, Polly, yelled Mr. Majors, momentarily giving the dog slack before wrapping the leash around his wrist and giving it a much more solid yank, one designed to bring the dog tumbling back to the clear of the park. Tired and annoyed, Mr. Majors was willing to be a little rougher with his pet than he would normally permit himself. Perhaps the leash did not give, except the leash did not give. It seemed fixed, unmoving. Perhaps Polly had somehow wrapped it around the base of a hedge or something. The man tried a second time, planting his feet and hoping his renewed effort would not hurt the dog. Only this time, something in the hedge pulled back. Polly? The dog did not answer, but the leash itself began to rise vertically through the wall of intertwined cedar branches, breaking some as it traveled upwards, bending others. Then, just as suddenly, the leash was pulled out of his hand and disappeared into the plant life, like somebody sucking up spaghetti noodles, knocking his posh headphones off at the same time. This was no squirrel. At least he hoped not. With all the pollution in the water these days, Mr. Majors had always had an unspoken concern about animals mutating. He tried one last time. Polly? Half hoping there'd be no answer. Again, no answer, except for the leash flying through the air and landing at his feet, complete with a broken collar. But no Polly. Some other dog owners might have been angry. Some other dog owners might have gone foraging in the bushes for the demonic squirrel or coyote or fox or whatever, confident that their size and loud mouth would protect them. But Justin Majors was not that kind of dog owner. Standing there for a few seconds in the dark, looking down at the remains of Polly's birthday present on the ground, discretion strongly suggested that he walk quickly into where the streetlights were beckoning. Stepping on his headphones, he quickly left, almost evacuating his own bowels. Now it seemed there's a possibility of a Polly 5.0. Behind the bushes that hugged one of the ravines threading through Toronto, a large and impossibly apex carnivore watched the man walk away. I guess we're up, Miss Deerchild.
Yes, indeed.
I guess here.
Yes. Good place of any, is any?
Bueno.
Thank you. Gosh. How's it going?
Oh, it's gone already.
Oh, is it? I was wondering.
It was never here.
What a good book, Drew.
You read it?
I did. I don't mean to sound so surprised, but you know, like horror genre is not usually my thing. I was traumatized by Stephen King and all of those crazy people. But I really enjoyed it. It's so good. So tell us, where are you taking readers in this story?
I gave a hint of it up there, but I wanted to do a contemporary, like I've always been, I consider myself a contemporary storyteller, right? And traditionally stories were told across a campfire, across the kitchen table. It was primarily an oral journey. And as civilizations and people evolved, so did storytelling. So now we tell stories over the decades, theater, print, radio, television, movies. And actually, if you go to play any in-depth video game, there's usually a deep and intricate narrative woven into video games nowadays. So I've sort of embraced that. I consider myself a contemporary storyteller rather than a traditional storyteller. And I like the idea of journeying into the past, a journey into the future. I've done it in a lot of my work. I did a book of science fiction short stories. I like exploring that. I did a book exploring Indigenous futurisms, where I got people to contribute, to explore where Native people are going in the next 20, 50 years from now. So that's sort of my journey. So with something like this, I want to take stories that our ancestors, our elders would have told us to tell us, to warn us about people, places, and things, and place them in a more contemporary and familiar environment.
And what traditional story have you taken into contemporary terms?
Well, it's always urged that we never say the word, but I will get some holy water on my way home. It's about what's called the Wendigo, which is both a creature from Anishinaabe and Cree culture. Wendigo, Wetago, several different ways of pronouncing the word. And the thing was, it's commonly known as a cannibal spirit, but it's so much more than that. It's a creature of appetites and hungers, and the most obvious one being hunger. The thing is, the Wendigo gets hungry, it eats and eats, and the more it eats, the bigger it gets, but the bigger its appetite gets and the bigger its stomach gets. So it's about a never-ending hunger. But it's about more than that. It's about anything that you get addicted to. It could be about drugs, it could be about greed, ambition, sex, even other things. It's about when, whatever you have is never enough. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the angle I was going through in that.
Yeah. You talk a lot about, the bringing Indigenous cosmology into contemporary times and so on. Why did you want to do that? Why did you want to bring the W word? Although it is winter, so according to protocol, we are allowed to say, but I don't want to call him that back.
It's like Beetlejuice, right?
If we only say 3 times in the span of this interview. Why did you want to bring the W word into contemporary times?
Well, it's a very popular legend amongst our people, and I've seen various manifestations of it. I mean, everybody remembers the Wendigo character. I think it was in Marvel Comics back in the 70 or 80, which was just a big, strong, hairy creature that had absolutely nothing to do with the original source material of the legend. And it sort of pops up in other pieces of literature. And I don't know, it just was, my Motorcycle and Sweetgrass dealt with a trickster. I wanted to, as I said, flip that over and deal with another character. And one of the things my publisher said when he read this is that they wanted me to do a second book, is that they wanted to do sort of a series of their terminology, not mine, Indigenous X-Files books,
Oh.
authored by DHT. That's right.
You had said earlier that these kinds of stories were shared among the Cree and Anishinaabe and many others about this greedy spirit as a warning. Were you trying to warn people about something in particular?
I think so. The fact that I placed it in a city too, right, where there's great excess and there's great denial. There's great poverty. There's great excess. People wanting more and more and more. Again, food being the obvious one, and so many other different things. And some of the characters that appear in here are sort of people who are greedy in their own way and their own methods, and as a result want more, who have a greater sense of ambition. So I was sort of also exploring that concept.
Yeah. What was the inspiration? There was mention, thanks for ruining that for me though, by the way, John. You had written a movie previous to the book. What was that journey for you?
Well, way back, I think it was in the 90s, CBC had an anthology series on Saturday or Sunday nights called Magic Hour. It was just a series of 1 hour dramas that they were doing, and I wanted to pitch something. I decided to do this, and so I wrote it and submitted it, but I think it was like I wasn't ready to write it. It wasn't very good. Any of a number of possibilities, but it didn't end up going anywhere. So I put it on the shelf, and I forgot about it. I just thought, it wasn't meant to be, so I put it there. And roughly, that's actually what I do. One of the things I tell anybody interested in up-and-coming writers is never throw anything out. Sometimes something doesn't work because it's not its time, or it's not its medium or genre. My very first novel, The Night Wanderer, a native vampire novel, was a play that I wrote. It was a contemporary Gothic Indian vampire story. It was the name of the play. And it was produced once in Saskatoon, but I didn't like it, so I put it away. And then when I was hired, I was commissioned to write a novel. I'm trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do? And I remember that play because I knew the characters, the situation. It just didn't gel as a play. And I took it down, I reread it, and I thought, this could be a novel. So I wrote it as a novel. It was very good. Motorcycles and Streetgrass was also a screenplay I wrote that didn't go anywhere. I wrote it as a novel. This was a screenplay I wrote, didn't go anywhere, so I wrote it as a novel. So I tell people, never throw anything out. Sometimes it's just, as I said, not the right time or not the right genre.
What made you pull that off the shelf again and take a look at it?
I was excited. I thought I can have so much fun with this because there's so many different things in it that I didn't know if I'd pull off. It's a murder mystery, it's a thriller, and I'd never done those before. I'd never done one before. I'm primarily known for anybody who knows my plays. I remember somebody, a theater reviewer was reviewing one of my plays and came out and said, well, basically Drew Hayden Taylor's plays are essentially plotless.
Oh.
There are people in a room talking or dealing with an issue, and I'm like, don't laugh, that's essentially roughly correct for some of my plays. And I was like looking at this and I'm going, I could probably turn this into kind of a decent thriller, because the one thing I was trying to do is I didn't want to give away who the Wendigo was. So I had to weave it so that it could be any of a number of characters. And so that's what I tried to do, and it seemed to work. It seemed to come together. And when my editor said, yeah, right up until the end, until the big reveal, I didn't know which one it was. And I went, yes, I've got a future in this career.
Yeah. And early in the book, I was like, I know who this is. But then I was like, oh, maybe not. Oh, wait. Oh. So, it's a big mystery. It will just be like, whoa. Oh, by the way, you're all invited into the conversation. If anybody has a question, please stick your hand up in the air and we'll get to you. I'm sure you all have good questions. There was a book club that was reading your book on Facebook, and they're either not done or they're standing in the back. I don't know where they are, but I hope they're here and they have some really good questions. But anyway, moving on. One of the things I noticed as I was reading the book is that you cite many Indigenous writers, Leslie Norman Silko, Waukesha Grice, Daniel Lee Justice, Lee Miracle, just to name some. Why the homage?
Well, I try to do something unique and interesting with each of my books. It sort of makes like special to that book. In Motorcycles and Sweetgrass, I had several of the characters doing this ongoing thing throughout it, where they talk about the 3 greatest inventions by white people that almost make colonization worth it, right? Mm-hmm. Everything from iced tea to plumbing, stuff like that. But the thing being, they do more than 3. I think at one point we counted them and it was like 7 or 8. It's just an ongoing thing about, the white people are really good for whatever. And so I tried to come up in the vampire novel, the grandmother had this bizarre fondness for pickles. Mm-hmm. And so I kept doing things like that. So I tried doing something unique and interesting with each book. And as I was going through this, I just thought, I have been very fortunate to come of age as a writer in what I refer to as the contemporary Indigenous literary renaissance, when there was this explosion of Native books, plays, poetry, etc. And as I was sitting here writing this, I think I'm like at the end of this book is the final product of all of those things happening. And I just wanted to pay homage to all the people I know, not all the people I know, because there's only, like, as you said, 6 or 7 or 8 in there. But I wanted to pick books by the people I knew or people I'd read. I do not know Leslie Norman Silko, but I read the Almanac of the Dead and absolutely adored it. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do little mini reviews in them. But the thing is, I want people to know very badly, these are not my reviews. It's the reviews of one of the characters, who is a professor of Indigenous literature, whose only connection to his Indigenous heritage is through the literature. So he's looking at it objectively. So frequently, he's very critical of some of the literature because it doesn't jive with his academic perspective, right? And I've actually had some people come up to me and say, you really have that opinion about Almanac of the Dead or Drawn Upside with the Kapuskasing? I'm going, no, that's the character's interpretation of that book.
That said, though, I mean, just mentioning them and sprinkling them out through your work as an homage, as a mention, as a push for people to know these storytellers. Again, why include them? Why did you want to include them in a book about Anishinaabe cosmology, in particular, the Wendigo?
I view it as a book as an exercise in storytelling, and the homage are to those storytellers who preceded me. Mm-hmm. That's why I just want. Basically, the answer why did I do it? Because I wanted to.
Fine.
You're looking for too deep an answer.
I am. I'm a journalist.
I'm too shallow. Haven't you figured that out? Ask Kim.
I don't have an answer for that. Anyway, question? Anyone? Oh yeah, here we go.
Okay, I want to know how hard it was to introduce an anecdote about butter tarts.
Anybody who's familiar with me on Twitter knows I have a addiction to butter tarts, but only raisin butter tarts. If they don't have raisins, they're not butter tarts. And I have started battles on Twitter over this. So it probably wasn't planned. To tell the truth, I don't even remember it in the book. It was just sort of, I must have been just tooting along writing, and I thought, I'll throw that in, see what happens. But, so as I said, I talk about this on Twitter frequently, and start fights and battles and stuff like that. But ironically, today, I'm not joking, today, as I was sitting on a plane in Toronto to come here, I'm going through my emails, and I've got an invitation to Ontario's Butter Tart Tasting Festival in Midland. So I've got to see if I can make it. Because
Sorry, book his ticket.
because I've actually also been invited to the International Festival of Authors. They have a 3-day festival of mystery and suspense books, and I've been invited to that. And it's right in the middle, so I got to see if I can make all this work. I was invited last year, but I was in Aruba. So it's like, I got to try and make it work. And of course, the big thing here being is I have to lament the fact that I'm diabetic. So I allow myself a butter tart like every 2-3 days. Otherwise, life just would not be worth living.
Good question. I missed the butter tart reference. Anybody else? Y'all haven't read the book, have you? You come to class unprepared.
So you mentioned the W word. I'm wondering, other than Winnipeg or winter, this is unreasonably, unnaturally warm. Because the book's named Cold, if it snows today or tomorrow, can we blame you?
I've been blamed for a lot worse for a lot less. So why not? Join the list.
It is unseasonably warm out. So you may be fooled to think that this is normal, but it's completely not normal. The other thing that I found throughout the book was lots of themes of abandonment, lots of themes of, as you said, this insatiable hunger that greed is, and fear and anger, being alone, being left alone. Why this theme?
Well, one of the characters in it, that was her life. That's how she started out. That's how she's maintained her life. And I think, without going into too much of the story, I think it was a point where she has an innate fear of being abandoned for obvious reasons, which you will read within the book. And I just sort of started to think that would be an excellent motivation for people to do things. People do things for love, for hate, any of a number of reasons, but also a fear of abandonment if it's well based. And I tried to paint that picture within here, and I think it works. And I just think we've all at various points in our lives have dealt with some form of abandonment. Sometimes it's a partner walking out or whatever. Sometimes it's really simple. Sometimes it's much more complex. And I just think, when you're writing a book, when you're writing characters, the thing about writing a character is it has to be 3-dimensional. It has to be as complex as your best friend. And so when I'm putting these characters together, I have to sit down, try and make their world as layered, as motivated, and as again complex as actual people. One of the reasons I became a writer, I like using this term, is I discovered that as a writer, I have more control over the universe I create than the universe I live in.
Put that on the button.
Sorry, it's copywritten.
But like all of the characters go through sort of those feelings. You're talking about Fabiola, the journalist, with the abandonment. Paul, who grew up in residential school, abandoned by his family.
Actually, no, it was the other guy, Elmore.
Elmore, sorry, and Paul, the hockey player, had his issues as well. And
we all have issues.
Yeah,
that's just it, right?
Issues, right?
I don't know if with the present company excluded, I don't think I've ever met a perfect individual. Anybody who does not.
Well, I don't know.
Somebody who doesn't have issues. So part of the fun of creating a character like this is, what is this character's issues? Seriously, what are they, and how can I use them in the story?
Yeah. But you seem to linger. I'm just, I don't want to get like a therapist on you, but are you okay?
I'm not okay. I'm fabulous.
Fair enough. Kim has a question.
You said, you said when you wrote this book and you sent it to your publisher, they asked for a sequel. Did that change your editing process for subsequent drafts?
No, it actually didn't. No, I don't work that way. I just wanted to make this one better. In fact, they asked me to make it longer. They asked me to add an ending to it. I originally ended it with one of the characters projectile vomiting on some ice. And they said, no, we need a little bit more after that. So I put that in, but no, I did not change what I was doing. It just sort of actually made me think on going, okay. Actually, in a weird sort of way it did, but we just had, I finished it off, the last couple chapters of where they are after what happens in here. And then from there, I can see the next story beginning. But it didn't affect the overall storytelling technique and content I was doing at the time.
What kind of process do you have when you're writing a novel like this?
This one was relatively easy as compared with other things because I had a screenplay that, you know, I used 40 to 55% of the skeletal make of the screenplay. You know, things change as you're writing it, especially when you're transmorphing it from a screenplay into a novel. So my process is basically, I try to write every day 1,500 to 2,000 words. I sit down, 2 parts in the day, you know, I work for 2 hours in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, pump it out, and by then I'm a little mentally exhausted and I nap or watch Star Trek. But yeah, that's basically about it. And this is actually quite kind of a thick book. It's almost, I think, 100,000 words. But Tolkien said when he was writing Lord of the Rings, the story grew in the telling. And like, I didn't expect this to be as big as it is. It just sort of, the story kept wanting to be told. I kept wanting to make the characters more and more interesting, have more and more backstory, and it ended up being this. So the ongoing process from here on in is I'm going to start working on the sequel in the summer, and I've got to try and hammer out what's going to happen, what I'm going to write the story about, how the characters are going to read, which characters to bring back, because there's the 2 male characters, and then there's the 2 female characters who are supporting characters, but they could be much more central characters in the next one, depending on how I want to paint this particular story.
So you're not sure what that story is going to be?
I know what's going to be at the
return of Ruby Birch.
Yeah. Is it Ruby going to come back? Is it Merle going, you know, come back? Because it said they want a Native X-Files, but the working title of the sequel to Cold, as part of a potential ongoing series, depending on how long I live. The sequel is going to be called, and I'll let everybody fill in the blanks. It's going to be called Small.
Ooh, you gave some hints to that in this book, without saying. Memingweeshik, which I would love a story about the Memingweeshik, this little people. You guys got to read this book. It's pretty epic. Any questions? We got in here. We got special events. Got his hand up. Oh.
Yes. So it had its roots in being a screenplay and it became a novel. Any hope that it turns into back to a screenplay? Somebody else looks at this and goes, "Oh
Series
my
on
gosh,
Crave.
yeah, Crave would love it."
We've got yes. We've got one person who's interested in buying it, whose partner I think is either Navajo or Choctaw, but is one of the writers on Echo and Darkwind.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing
Kim's
is,
Googling it right now.
what's that?
Stephen Paul
It has 3 names.
Yeah,
Stephen Paul Judd.
That's one name. That's his name. But he writes on Echo.
I'd never trust writers with 3 names.
I meant that.
So somebody wants that. Somebody else who does Canadian series is looking at it. You know, I don't know. Filmmaking in Canada is so weird. So some people are looking at it, fingers and toes crossed. Now I have to decide, as I said, this possible thing in the States with the Indigenous writer. Do I want to put in the contract that I write it? Or am I willing to give it to somebody else who has, more of an understanding of how American television or American structure works? I don't know yet. I'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yes, I do. It's very visual and very narrative, and that
Short little chapters with scenes. It's made for TV, baby. It's made for TV.
And the final climactic battle.
Without telling you.
It's so
Because
fun.
I'm not gonna.
One of the things about being, you know, how can I say this? I have, I know a lot about a few things and a few things about a lot. But one of the, it's like in doing this, sometimes, as I said, you have to make your characters three-dimensional. You have to make the universe big and believable. And one of the characters is an over-the-hill Indigenous hockey player who does not know where his life is going to go from here. He's like just at the tail end of his career. And the thing is, like, unlike a lot of Indigenous people, Indigenous men, I do not have that strong a working knowledge of how hockey works. My basic memory of hockey is going across the road to my grandparents who would watch Hockey Night in Canada every Saturday night. I go over primarily because they buy six packs of pop and big things of chips, and I would have them and I'd be asleep by the end of the second period. I can't skate, so I'm not a hockey person yet. This character, so I would go to my cousin Ryan, right? And I would go, Brian, do they still use wooden hockey sticks? Like professionally? And he'd go, no, they use a graphite composite or something like that. I go, oh, thank you. Do they still use aluminum skates? No. So almost every hockey reference you see in there is thanks to my cousin Ryan, and there's actually quite a bit of Anishinaabe in here too.
There is, yeah.
That is thanks to two of my cousins who have relearned the language.
Wow.
Which is,
I was gonna ask, when did you learn Anishinaabe?
in Aruba.
She's got a place to study it, if any. There was another question over here in the aisle.
I had a question about the spirits, and you know, you're talking about the W word, the Wendigo, and how do you, as like an artist, like engage with spirits as you're writing about them? I just know from my personal experience as well, being an artist, and I've done work around Wendigo too, and I had to think about the spirit a lot, and then it exists in the work for a long period of time. And so I'm curious how, and thinking about the next book with Mimicus, and yeah, what's your way?
Well, as with anything in life, respect.
Mm-hmm.
I actually went out and I put tobacco down and said, basically, I'm going to write to me in the world. I'm going to be writing this novel about the Wendigo, and I'm going to, while he is a cannibalistic, vicious monster, he's still part of our heritage, part of the teachings of our people. So I'm going to do it with as much respect as I can into it, and understanding more than anything else. And in fact, at the end of the book, I actually make a special acknowledgement to the Wendigo spirit for, I guess, thanking it, meaning no disrespect, and thanking it for allowing me to use her in my storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And now go away.
Let me give you Rosanna's hand.
I moved. Oh, there's another question here from Butter Tart Lady.
I can't keep thinking about the characters that you're saying that you're building them as three-dimensional as you possibly can. Do you make notes ahead of time, or do they just develop as the story goes along, or how do you populate them that way?
They develop as I write them. When I'm developing a novel or a play, I don't make notes. I'll let you in on a secret. I actually hate writing. If I could do anything else, I would, but I have no serviceable talent, so I became a writer. But now, with that being said, I love using, there's a quote by a 1940s writer named Dorothy Parker, who once said, "I hate writing, but I love having written."
Mm.
And that's me. So I don't write outlines because that's just more writing.
Your English teacher must have loved you.
There's a story. Remind me of that after this. But so I think it all up. But the thing is, I think of the big, broad concepts. And if they're big and broad and I come up with them, they interlock with the others. This leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. And so it all makes sense. I don't have to write it out. What I sometimes do is I keep a little notebook of jokes, of little ironic, say they're in a room and something will be on the shelf pertaining to the larger story. It's small, it's minute, it's stuff I would forget. It's it's like picking stuff up. Small stuff falls through your fingers. The big stuff will stay. So I do make notes about small things, but the big stuff, it's woven into the telling of the story. And same with the characters. The characters, why are they there? What makes them tick? Why are they interesting? That's for me, that's just, I don't know if it comes from my theater background or whatever, but that's what, it's easy for me.
English teacher story?
When I was first trying to come up with what I wanted to do in my life, I decided I was toying with the idea of being a writer, but I didn't know anything about it because when I was growing up 1,000 years ago, we didn't study any native authors. There were no native authors in the library. There were no native authors that I knew of that made it into Lakefield District Secondary School, a town of 2,000, 20 minutes from my reserve. So I didn't even know if native people could write, would write, or were allowed to write. So I remember going to my grade 11 English teacher, walking in the door, and I remember he was looking for something in the bottom left-hand drawer of his desk. And I walked up to him and I said, sir, I've been wondering, is it possible to make a living from creative writing? And without even looking up, he said, no, not really. So that was like the first, I ended up giving up writing for about 10 years. For about 8 to 10 years, because even my mother, my dear poor mother, I told my mother I wanted to be a writer, and my mother looked at me with a perplexed look and said, why do you want to be a writer? It's not going to get you anywhere. And I know where my mother was coming from. My mother had a grade 6 education. Her first language was Anishinaabe-Moan, and she'd spent essentially 30 years cooking and cleaning, primarily for white people. And so the idea of writing was just literally not on her radar. So with that kind of encouragement, I gave up writing till my mid-20s.
Yeah. What ultimately led you back? I mean, I know you say you don't have any other skills, which I disagree, but something had to lead you back. Did you feel that was a natural calling? Was that something that was inside you that just desperately wanted to come out?
Most people I know, artists, I know, talk about chasing their art, spending their time doing this, that trying to develop their art, trying to develop themselves as artists, all that sort of stuff. I left that behind because I really loved arts. I loved the ability that artists had to create something wonderful out of practically nothing. But I was told that wasn't my path, so I gave it up. But I liked hanging around with artists. I thought artists were interesting, were fun, beats accountants.
They beat accountants?
So anyways, I was working in various fields of art that had to do with the arts, but not as an artist. I worked for CBC as a trainee radio producer. I did the location sound on a couple of documentaries on Native culture. I worked for the Canadian Native Arts Foundation, now called Inspire. And then I worked for a film company that was doing a television series that was shot in Northwestern Ontario about life on a reserve through the eyes of kids. I don't know if anybody here remembers a series called Spirit Bay, but I worked on that. And all the writers were white, all the directors were white, all the producers were white, and a third of the cast was white. And I just literally read about this. I phoned them up and said, you're doing a show about kids on a reserve. You should have some native or reserve native people working in the office. You should hire me. And they did. Of course, I knew nothing of filmmaking. So I ended up doing production assistant, casting assistant, chaperone. And one of the things I got to do was, I was the, quote, unofficial technical advisor, because I was the only person in the production, other than some of the actors, who was Indigenous and who'd grown up on a reserve. So they would give me elements of the script to say, is this technically accurate? Keeping in mind that the Indigenous people of Northwestern Ontario are identical to the Indigenous people north of Toronto. So they would give me these scripts to read, and I would read them, and it said, is it technically accurate? And I would say, yes. Native people eat toast. Anyways, long story short, after that, I ended up doing when that show closed, I was like, I had a very hungry landlord that liked to be fed on a regular basis. And I was doing an article for a magazine on adapting Native stories into a television and film format. I talked to all these story producers on all these television shows across Canada. And I ended up talking with one, and I don't remember if it was me or her, but one of us suggested I submit some story ideas just for the heck of it. And just as a joke, I did. I submitted 2. Lo and behold, they read it, they liked it, they bought it, they commissioned it, I wrote it, they produced it, and they broadcast it. And it was for a show called The Beachcombers. I was 12. So that is my introduction to writing. That's literally the first thing I wrote was an episode of The Beachcombers. I was 25, right? And then from there, I did a north of 60, we won't get into that. I did a street legal, and then around then, Thompson Highway, who is artistic director of Native Earth, had gotten a grant for a playwright in residency program, and he was looking for a playwright resident. But in Ontario, there were 2 working Native playwrights. There was himself and a man named Daniel David Moses, who was the outgoing writer in residence. So he was desperate, and he did what a lot of desperate people do. He went to the bottom of the barrel, and there I was, passed out. And he asked,
drunk the whole barrel, or?
and he asked me if I wanted to be the writer in residence, and I said no, because I didn't know anything about theater. I thought theater and theater artists were pretentious, and I still do. And I said no, and he said, Drew, look at it this way, because I was doing television, but 1 script a year, which is not enough to survive on. And he just basically said, look at it this way, Drew. You have to sit through the rehearsal of 2 plays, maybe write a play at the end of it. It's 20 weeks work, and you get a nice check at the end of each week. And I said, when do I start? So that is, I'm not joking, my introduction to the world of theater. And so I woke up one morning and was a playwright. Woke up one morning and was a television writer.
Yeah.
I woke up one morning and was a novelist.
Quite a week it was for him.
It's what you drink.
What was in that barrel, Drew?
Ayahuasca.
Any other questions? There's one over here at the end of the aisle.
Hi, I've got 2 questions for you. So the first one is, I'm not a writer. I've never really written anything, but I am an academic, so I write that way. And I know how I write. Here, 10 different ideas going at once. Do you write simultaneously? Or do you write one novel and then move on to the next, and then on to the next? Or are you writing multiple projects at the same time?
In a perfect world, I would like to be working on one project at a time, but sometimes I do articles and essays for magazines, newspapers, media outlets, etc., while I'm working on a play or a novel. So I can mix and match. And the best way I know I can describe doing that is, it's like if you've ever done weight training in a gym, on one day you'll work on your legs and core, another day you'll work on your backs and arms, on another day you'll work on your shoulders and whatever. When I'm working on a novel, it doesn't affect writing a play, right? I won't work on 2 novels at the same time. That would be just weird. But I can mix and match, because to me they use different parts of my mind, the analytical versus the creative versus whatever. So yeah, I can work on different projects at the same time, but not identical genres at the same time.
Interesting. Why do you think that? I like that idea of exercises different parts of your brain.
Yeah. It's like, as I said, using the weight training metaphor, it's like, yeah, you may make your legs and your core sore day 1, and then you work on your back and your arms day 2, make that sore, and then you work on your shoulders and whatever the next day.
Which is not to say you work out, though.
I have. You think this body's natural?
I'm just wondering. Did you have a second question?
Yeah, the second question is, I haven't read the book yet. But I am reading.
We can wait.
Yeah. Page 1.
Page 1, yeah. But I am reading Chasing Painted Horses, which so far is beautiful. It's unsettling, but it's beautiful. But this book, just to preface it, for me, is there a character in there that you identify with most?
Oh.
Or is it a composite?
A friend of mine, Herbie Barnes, used to say that I used to put myself in every one of the plays, which every one of my plays, which I disagree. No, I don't think I'm in Cold, because I'm not a borderline alcoholic academic. I'm not an over the hill hockey player. Well, do you disagree?
I mean, I'm just saying, as somebody who knows you a little bit, there's little pieces of you throughout that.
Of course there are.
I've heard you say some of those things that Elmore says, for example.
Yeah, there's little bits of me in there, but they're not based on me. I'm not that interesting. The novel of my life would be that thing.
I highly doubt that. Oh, there's another one. Back there, just a second.
Wonderful. So we're just approaching the top of the hour. So these two will be our last
That went
questions. Then we'll turn things over to these folks for any closing comments. Then we will summon Charlene up to offer the final word. So you had questions? No.
Back to the character thing. Do you base your characters on perhaps anyone you know or travel with or work with?
No, I don't know what you mean, Andrew. Andrew is a cameraman on and one of the producers too on Going Native, our series. No, but what I do frequently is I take little bits from people I've met around the world and in my life and insert them into characters. I long ago experimented with basing them on real characters, but I found that so limiting and boring because I'd sit there going, and I'd be writing going, wonder what Andrew would do at this moment. And I found it very limiting, so I would move beyond, right? So what you were commenting on concerning the little reviews of the books, right? There's a comment in there about Dry Lips How to Move to Kapuskasing. These two characters are discussing theater in a cafe. They're talking about it, and they're having this discussion on, is Dry Lips How to Move to Kapuskasing a play about misogyny or a misogynistic play? And I've heard that discussed, right? It's not something I've said, I've heard other people say it. I insert it in, and these are two characters that are there for about 2 pages and then disappear. So yes, I cherry pick from friends. And speaking of which, I think I told you in my new book, there's a character in it who's playing guitar and has dreams of heavy metalness. And it's based on a certain 2 people sitting over there.
I wonder who it could be. We're just gonna wrap up, but I wanted to ask you this question. Earlier you had said, you know, there was a period in time when there was suddenly a lot of Indigenous storytellers putting their stories to page and getting out there. What do you think that was about? Like, why is this sudden rise? You know, because I didn't grow up with authors, you didn't grow up with authors, storytellers, and suddenly there was this moment in time when there was just so many amazing stories.
It used to be, we were lucky, like in late 80s, that there'd be a book by a Native author coming out every 2, 3, 4 months. And now it's almost every 2 weeks or a week, if not. I can't keep up. You know, as somebody who works in this environment, I'm often asked to be an expert on Indigenous literature, and I just can't keep up. You know, have you read this? No, I haven't. There's a stack at home by my table. Why this is, I don't, it could be just a growing sense of self-awareness. The 60s and 70s had happened, so there was this growing awareness, growing sense of self-confidence, of wanting more for your children, of wanting to tell your stories, of being properly represented in the media. And I think that's where it was coming from. You've heard the famous line that a lot of Native actors use, I wasn't seeing myself on television. I wasn't reading about myself, you know, having grown up on the reserve. The only stuff I ever read about anybody on the reserve was by W.P. Kinsella. right? And at the time, reading it, I actually enjoyed it, only because nobody else was writing this stuff, right? And then as I got more into his stuff and I began reading other people's, I sort of, you know, you get that counter understanding, that counter knowledge to it. So I think it was just the right time, the right place, and we were ready to tell our stories, and I think Canada was ready to listen.
Yeah, and we're also seeing an expansion of genres like yourself, or Eden Robinson, and all of these. We're bringing these contemporary looks into our traditional characters and figures. Where do you hope it's going to go?
Oh, it's so exciting. I mean, it used to be for the first 15, 20 years of the contemporary Indigenous literary renaissance, the vast majority of the novels coming to the First Nations community was dark, depressing, bleak, sad, and angry, primarily because when an oppressed people get their voice back, they're going to write about being oppressed, right? Thompson Highway likes to use this quote from someone: before the healing can take place, the poison must be exposed. And so that's what was happening. It was like, before we can heal, we have to let the world, ourselves and the world, know the trials, the tribulations of colonization. And so that came out. And after that all started coming out, I think we began to sort of experiment with ways of storytelling. My personal journey as an elder from the Blood Reserve once told me that, in his opinion, for Native people, humor is the WD-40 of healing. And I liked it. So I thought, that's what I want. I want to deal with healing. So I started writing humor and putting humor into as many of my things as possible. And now there's so many different genres happening, right? Science fiction has become big with Sherry Demerlane and Wabigisha Grice, you know, all that stuff. And was it about 15 years ago? Was it Cataract Wednesday Dan had a book as a compiled, edited, published a book of international Indigenous erotica, sort of like 50 Shades of Red. And there's just all sorts of wonderful types of storytelling coming out. We're embracing genre fiction and running with it, right? You know, when I did a native vampire story in a time when everybody was telling me there's no such thing as native vampires. Well, there are now. You know, and I rationalized it by saying I took a European legend and indigenized it and brought it home. And I'm just turning the tables and having a great time doing it.
Well, Drew, thank you very much for this time. Drew Hayden Taylor, ladies and gentlemen.
And I do weddings and bar mitzvahs.
I bet you do. Wow, that was a very fast hour, was it not? Just fled. Thank you both, Drew, Rosanna, what a great conversation. And 34 books is a huge accomplishment. 35,
This is the 35th.
35 now. So when I think about the Indigenous literature renaissance, which is a huge boon to all of us because it enriches the world that we all live in. And big kudos to you for your contributions to it, because you have been traipsing through so many different genres and experimenting and making us laugh and making us worry and making us wonder what's next. So congratulations on this novel, and thank you for your generosity tonight in giving us a glimpse of your process and the book. Please, one more round of applause for Drew Hayden Taylor. And one also for our favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild. I'm Charlene Deal. I'm the director of the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, and we collaborate with McNally Robinson, especially during the festival in the fall, but we really treasure these chances to gather throughout the year in this signature series. So I'd like to take a moment to just acknowledge the extraordinary generosity and feeling of community that this wonderful bookstore offers to us all. And of course, John, who pops up like the Wizard of Oz here, makes everything work so smoothly. So please, a big shout out to McClelland Robinson and John. There's not a single person, I think, doing events, literary events in the country who comes anywhere close to John's level of organization, precision, courtesy. Like, Anyway, he's pretty amazing.
I slipped her $20.
You haven't yet, actually. I'm looking for my money. A big thanks also to McClelland Stewart for making this trip here for Drew possible. And I'd like to just flag for you that we have 2 more events in our spring series coming up. I guess you can call it spring if there's puddles out there, right? Although it's February. The next one is a month from now, March 13th. We're welcoming Kazim Ali. We're very excited about that. And then spinning forward to the middle of May, we're welcoming another of the magnificent Indigenous voices in this country right now, Billy Ray Belcourt, who will be here in conversation with Katharina Vermette. So you'll hear lots about those 2 coming up. Keep your eye on the McNally Robinson website and newsletters. And if you haven't also subscribed to our newsletter, we'd love to have you there. You can catch me or Chelsea afterward and ask to get put onto that list. Thank you so much for coming tonight. There is a rule. You have to sit here like politely while Drew is ferried off to his signing table by the purchase desk. And when he's safely there, then you're allowed to move again. And then you can line up there to get your book signed. You can buy a book at the counter and then get it signed, or you can get your book signed and then buy it at the counter, but you have to pay for it before you leave the store. That's how they do it. They're here. Thank you so much for coming tonight. One more round of applause, please.